So welcome back to This Week in Video Games, and today Bungie dropped a really big This Week at Bungie update going over abilities and other sandbox items too that we got coming up in Season 15. So normally I would read the news before recording a video, but today I'm going to be doing a live reading of the TWAB, so let's kick it off. So this week at Bungie, we started shaking up the sandbox. So welcome to the TWAB. We've got loads to cover today, so I'm going to skip the small talk and get into it. Well, yesterday, Assistant Game Director and Moustache Enthusiast Joe Blackburn went out on Twitter and talked more about upcoming plans regarding Destiny 2 PvP, and I did make a video on that yesterday, so if you want to go and check that out, do that now. So Cosmo does say, please give the whole thread a read, but for the TLDR crew, the main thing we want to make sure that we have a plan, it's going to take some time, and we're excited about the future of creating a more consistent delivery of PvP content each year. Okay, so let's get into the detail of the update now. So we've got the best of your ability, and our teams have been hard at work putting together a lot of changes for next season. So we decided to break out upcoming sandbox changes into 3 parts. This week we're covering abilities, next week we'll talk about armor and mods, and then we're going to touch on weapons during the final week before the end of the season. So here is combat gameplay designer Eric Smith to give you the rundown on how Guardian's abilities are going to be evolving next season. So Eric takes over and says, hey Guardians, we've been hard at work on an abilities balance patch for Season 15, but before we get into the balance changes, here's some info about a quality of life change debuting in Season 15. So we've got separate melee actions. So have you ever tried to throw a knife at an approaching Screeb, only instead to lunge forward to slap the Screeb in its gross exploding face? Or have you ever accidentally wasted your hard-earned melee charge on a sad lone Dreg? If so, there's hope. Introducing separate melee actions. Well, starting next season, you're going to be able to bind your charged melee attack and your uncharged melee attack to separate inputs, giving you greater control of when you use your abilities. So this is an opt-in feature, and those new actions will be unbound by default. When you go to customize your controls, you'll see the following new entries in the action list. So we've got auto melee is the new name for the melee action that you're used to, and your melee is context sensitive, and its behavior will change based on your equipped ability and your proximity to enemies. It usually does its job well, but will occasionally betray the player intent. And we got charge melee as a new action that will always activate your charge melee upon a button press, regardless of whether an enemy is in lunge range. So pressing the input when your melee ability is not fully charged will perform no action and cause the melee ability icon to flash red, similar to how the grenade ability works. Then we got uncharged melee, so that's a new action, and it's always going to activate your uncharged melee, even when your charge melee ability is fully charged. So it's fairly straightforward, but here are some things to note. Melee attacks trigger as soon as the button is pressed, not when it's released. Melee attacks don't wait to see if you're still holding the button before starting. This means you can't set any of the melee actions to a long press or a double press input. Game controllers have a limited number of inputs, so you may need to get creative of how you map your controls. Personally, I like to put charge melee on RB, R2, and the uncharged melee on the right stick, click, or R3. This doubles up the finisher and the uncharged melee actions on the right stick or R3, which will prioritise finishing enemies over meleeing them if the enemy is in a finishable state. If you assign a charge melee and uncharged melee to the same input, it will always prioritise the charge melee over the uncharged melee, which is the opposite behaviour of the auto-charge melee action. So to use these new actions on the keyboard and mouse, open the settings menu, click on the keyboard and mouse, scroll down to the charge melee and the uncharged melee and assign them to an input. And to use these new actions on the controller, open the settings menu, go to the controller, button layout, custom, scroll down to charge melee and uncharged melee and assign them to an input. And we hope you enjoy this new functionality, and we hope that it saves you bacon from time to time. Well, next up we got long-term ability plans. So last season, Sandbox lead Kevin Yanis laid out our vision for how we see subclass abilities fitting into the Destiny 2 sandbox moving forward. So our philosophy for ability design is that abilities should complement the core combat of Destiny and not dominate it. It should enhance the game's gunplay but not replace it, and the changes we're introducing in Season 15 will help set the stage for those larger systematic ability changes. In the coming season, we'll be focusing on adjusting how often abilities can be used in the Crucible specifically, and please stay tuned for more information on that. So we've got the Season 15 Ability Balance Pass. So for Season 15 we prepared a slew of balance changes to raise underperforming subclasses and tone down overperforming subclasses. So without further ado, here's the ability changes we'll be making in Season 15. So we've got general abilities, and surprise surprise, Stasis Freeze is first. So the goal of these changes is to make being frozen by stasis less frustrating. Previously, players who were frozen in the air had to wait until they hit the ground to start the breakout process, and additionally we shortened the window of vulnerability between breaking out the stasis encasement and losing the damage resistance it provides and getting back to weapon ready so you can fight back. So frozen players can now initiate breakout while airborne, shorten breakout animation on camera transition, and this means that once you decide to break out, you'll be able to fight back sooner, and differentiated long freeze and short freeze visual treatment to make each status easier to identify. Well, next up we've got slide. So the goal of the slide change is to slightly reduce the effectiveness of sliding into engagements to gain the upper hand. So even after the shotgun changes were made last season, sliding into every engagement with a shotgun or any weapon is still incredibly effective, and run and gun playstyles are very low risk. This is a change that looks scary on paper than it feels in practice in our opinion. We'll continue to monitor how it plays out. So while sliding, players now incur the following weapon penalties, so minus 20 stability, and plus 15 shotgun pellet spread, and 1.5 times flinch. Wow, so if you are a shotgun user, this one should really affect you. Well, next up we've got the Titan changes. So we've got Rally Barricade. So this barricade variant doesn't see much use, so we've made changes to make it more of a viable option. It retains the same reload speed benefits as before, while adding some other buffs. So standing behind the Rally Barricade now also provides the following weapon buffs: plus 30 to stability, plus 10 on range, and minus 50 to flinch. Wow, that is a real incentive to use the Rally Barricade. We've got all barricades, so currently certain fast moving abilities allow you to speed through an enemy barricade while taking minimal damage. The goal of this change is to make players think twice before dashing through a barricade to engage the Titan on the other side, and barricades still can't cause lethal damage, but dashing through one should now always leave you with a sliver of health. So players moving at high velocity now take more damage when moving through the hostile Titan barricades, and barricades now slightly protrude into the ground to better protect the Titan's feet on uneven ground. This should reduce instances where explosions and projectiles are able to sneak through the bottom of the barricade and hit the Titan. Next up we've got Behemoth. As you may remember, midway through last season we released a portion of the stasis related changes originally intended for this release. So we're pretty happy with the effect of those changes have had in Crucible, but some of the changes made a negative effect on the feel of stasis and PvE content. So we have made some adjustments that should help these abilities feel better. In this case, the Cryoclasm change we made last season made it difficult to use Cryoclasm to shatter targets that were close to you, and this change enables Behemoth to shatter nearby targets even if they don't have enough space to get a running start. And we also believe that we overdid the movement speed nerf to the Behemoths last season, which hurt the viability of Shiver Strike, especially during the Glacial Quake Super, and we've increased the movement speed to make this feel better. So with this patch, we're also fixing a bug where the Whisper of Rhyme Overshield wasn't properly scaling with precision damage, causing it to be significantly beefier than intended, which primarily impacted Tectonic Harvest Behemoths. So here's the changes. We've got Cryoclasm while equipped, Base Slide now shatters crystals and frozen enemies, increased duration of screen effects notifying players that Cryoclasm Long Slide is ready from 1 second to about 4.5 seconds. And we've got Shiver Strikes, increased movement speed by 25%, and Whisper of Rhyme fixed a bug where the Overshield provided Whisper of Rhyme, it was not scaling precision damage correctly. Well, next up we've got Middle Tree Sunbreaker. This is one of my favourites. So we are extending the throwing hammer lifespan to allow Titans more time to finish an engagement and still pick up their hammer before it vanishes. So we felt it could deal more damage against Origin Yellow Bar enemies, and also the new charge melee action allows you to throw a hammer at point blank range at an enemy, which is pretty badass. So throwing hammer increased the time before the hammer explodes after hitting the ground from 6.5 seconds to 10 seconds. That is a massive improvement, and increased damage versus powerful PvE combatants by about 50%. Wow, that is a huge buff. I'm really looking forward to continue using my Middle Tree Sunbreaker. So we got Top and Bottom Tree Striker. So some of the game's melee based supers are a bit of a disadvantage in today's sandbox, so we've decided to give a few of them some love, and in future we'll be looking at ways to reduce the disparity between melee supers and ranged supers in a more sustainable way. So we've got Fist of Havoc, increase the slam detonation radius by 14%, reduce slam damage fall off, and reduce slam damage activation costs from 21% to 18%. So next up we've got Middle Tree Striker. So this change will be balanced out by something we haven't mentioned yet. We'll say more about this in a future TWAB. So Inertia Override, increase the duration from 4 seconds to 6 seconds, and sliding over an ammo brick now grants 20% melee energy. So that is a nice little buff to Middle Tree Striker. We've also got Top Tree Sentinel, so the following changes refer to the Ward of Dawn bubble itself and not players inside that bubble. Currently dropping a Ward of Dawn on top of a boss is a no-brainer because it's so effective, and the goal of this change is to reduce the breadth of encounters sold by the Ward of Dawn and make the burly bubbles a conscious choice by the Titan. So with the Ward of Dawn, increase the damage taken from bosses by 0.25x to about 7x at 0 resilience, and damage taken can scale down 0.25x based on the owner's resilience stat. Well, that is a massive nerf there to the Ward of Dawn. Well, next up we've got the Hunter changes, so we've got Revenant first. So last season we reduced the radius of silence freeze, and that change has played out well, requiring the Revenant to be more precise with their silence throws. Even now, silence feels like the scarier part of the super. We wanted Squall to feel more dangerous. So currently Squall Storm is slow enough that you can kind of ignore it or fight until it gets close and then relocate. So with this speed change, we want players to prioritise relocating where they see an approaching Squall, and additionally Squall will now stop when it touches a boss, which would make it better for single target boss damage. However, there is a known issue where the Squall will not start moving again if the boss moves or dies. We hope to further improve this behaviour in a future release. So we feel we hit Withering Blade slightly too hard in last season's stasis balancing, and the following change should make it slightly easier to land while keeping the damage and slow duration at a reasonable spot. So with Silence and Squall, increase the Squall movement speed by 20%, and Squall Storm now stops when it touches a boss, and with the Withering Blade, increase projectile speed and tracking by 10%. Well, next up we've got Middle Tree Gunslinger. We'd also like to give Hunters a larger window to defeat burning enemies and trigger the Playing with Fire perk, and as such we're giving the Knife Trick timer a 25% buff. So with Knife Trick, increase the burning duration from 3 seconds to 4 seconds. Next up we got the Top Tree Gunslinger. So this super has been through a lot. We've intentionally reduced the effective range of 6-shooter several seasons ago to balance it against the Bottom Tree Golden Gun, and this change was then unintentionally reverted at some point due to an unrelated integration mishap, and then later de-reverted. In any case, we're extending the lethal range of the super a little to reduce how often it requires 2 shots to kill in the Crucible. So 6-shooter, damage fall off now starts at 25 meters instead of 20 meters. Well, next up we got Arc Strider. So as we previously mentioned, melee supers such as Arc Staff are struggling a bit in today's sandbox where the players move extremely fast, weapons hit extremely hard, and ranged supers handily win duels. So we've extended the duration of the slam range to help alleviate some of the Arc Staff's shortcomings, but we'll continue to evaluate super dynamics and search for a solution that doesn't cause power creep. Additionally, Arc Staff need a little love in high-level PvE content, so we've increased its damage output there as well. So with the Arc Staff, extended passive super duration from 16 seconds to 20 seconds, increased heavy slam detonation radius from 5 to 6 meters, and increased the damage versus PvE combatants by 33%. That is a massive buff. Then we got Top Tree Arc Strider, so Deadly Reach, increased duration from 8 seconds to 10 seconds, and Middle Tree Arc Strider with Lightning Weave, dealing damage to Tempest Strike now triggers Lightning Weave, and timer can now be extended by dealing damage with any weapon. And finally with the Hunters we've got Middle Tree Night Stalker, so Spectral Blades not only allows its user to go invisible and vanish from radar, but also has one of the highest damage reduction values in the game. So as the fantasy of this ability is that it's a stealthy assassin and not a stealthy raid boss, we decided to tone down the damage reduction. So looking at the data, Middle Tree Night Stalker is among the most successful subclasses in the Crucible, so this is a change that feels warranted. So Spectral Blades reduce the damage reduction of super from 52% to 47%, and reduced additional DR when invisible from +5 to +3%. Well, next up we've got changes to the Warlock. We're going to start off with Shadebinder. So Winter's Wrath is one of the best dueling supers in the game, capable of quickly and easily dispatching other supers. So we're okay with that being a strength of the Shadebinder in PvP, but we felt melee supers needed more of a fighting chance against the Shadebinder. So with Winter's Wrath, reduce the Shatter Pulse damage versus close range supers, and Warlocks now must freeze and shatter twice to defeat players in Burning Maul, Fist of Havoc and Sentinel Shield, Nova Warp, Arc Staff and Spectral Blades, and Glacial Quake will still require only 1 shatter to defeat. So with Top Tree Dawnblade, looks like this is getting a significant rework. So Top Tree Dawnblade, TTD is straight up dominant in PvP, so we're taking some measures to make it slightly less so. So Celestial Fire will now take a little more accuracy to get full damage, and having access to 2 back-to-back Icarus dashes gave the subclass too much positioning flexibility, allowing for quick long distance flanking and evasion. So when playing against TTD, it's hard to know if they have an Icarus dash ready to go, even if you just saw them use one. So we're hoping this change makes playing against TTD more predictable. And we want the identity of TTD to be found in aerial combat, so we're doubling down on the heat rises. And we hope this change makes heat rises more accessible to players of all skill levels. So we've got Celestial Fire, reduces tracking cone angle. Arming shape or proximity destination now shrinks over time. Reduce destination size by 1 meter. And damage fall off increases at short distances. So with Icarus Dash, it now provides 1 air dodge every 4 seconds. And while under the effect of heat rises, increases to 2 dodges every 5 seconds. So with heat rises, increases the duration from 10 seconds to 15 seconds, and increase that time extension awarded for air kills while heat rises are active, and the extension duration differs based on the type of enemy killed. And your location now appears on enemy radar when using heat rises. So we've also got Middle Tree Dawnblade. Like Ward of Dawn, dropping a well on certain bosses is a no-brainer because it's so effective, and the goal of the below change is to reduce the breadth of encounters solved by Well of Radiance and make Burly Wells a conscious choice by the Warlock. Additionally, we'd like to make Well of Radiance more effective in the Crucible, so you'll still have more survivability while in the well, and you won't be able to be frozen or slowed by stasis users, making this tree a solid choice when facing off against stasis. The Well's sword can be frozen and shattered, but it takes multiple freezes and shatters before being destroyed. So with Well of Radiance, increase the damage taken from bosses by 2.5x to 1.5x at 0 resilience. The damage taken can scale down to 0.25x based on the owner's resilience stat. Then you've got increased damage resistance buff versus enemy players from 20% to 40%. So players inside the Well of Radiance are now immune to stasis freeze and slow, and Well's sword can now be frozen and shattered by stasis. So we've also got the Guiding Flame, increased duration from 7 seconds to 10 seconds, and increase the damage buff from 20% to 25%. We've also got changes to Bottom Tree Dawnblade, so this tree has felt a little lackluster when compared to the Warlock's other options, so we've given it some enhanced functionality. Like the Revenant's Shatter Dive, Phoenix Dive can now dive down diagonally in the direction of your choosing. So Bottom Tree Dawnblade also has one of the weaker melee attacks in the game, so you had to defeat an enemy with a melee impact to cause an explosion. So with this new rework, anytime you defeat an enemy who is burning or defeat an enemy with your solar abilities, they'll explode to put a burn on nearby enemies. And your charge melee deals 120 damage and puts a burn on the enemy, meaning you can't follow up with another lethal attack and still get the explosion. So as a side note, this will be even more effective with the Dawn Chorus exotic helmet. So that is definitely a build to look out for next season. So then we've got the Phoenix Dive, so reduce the delay before the dive starts, and now you can input a direction to dive in that direction. Then we've got Igniting Touch, so ability rework. Solar ability kills and kills on burning targets now cause the targets to explode and burn other nearby enemies, who are also going to explode if they die while burning. Well, next up we've got Middle Tree Stormcaller, so these changes should lead to less instances of Chaos Reach dealing damage to enemies on the other side of a wall. So Arc Beam sees high use in the Crucible, in part due to the Geomag stabilizers, and is often used as a shutdown super. In future seasons we'll be looking at Arc Beam to make sure it's not too easy to use in the Crucible. So with Chaos Reach, increase beam environment collision size to better match collision size with the damage size, and reduce the beam damage radius in PvP by 20%. And reduce the beam endpoint sphere radius in PvP by 33%, so that is a massive nerf to Chaos Reach, especially in PvP. So next up we've got Bottom Tree Stormcaller. Player feedback and data on Bottom Tree Stormcaller indicated it could use a little love, so we made Arc Soul last a little bit longer and slightly shortened in the time between the bursts. So Landfall also felt a little bit underwhelming, so we increased the spectacle a little bit. It's now going to fire 5 arc projectiles along the ground in all directions, so cast your super in the middle of a room to electrocute everything around you. Well, that sounds really, really good. So with Arc Soul, increase the duration from 12 seconds to 13 seconds and increase rate of fire by 10%. Electrostatic Surge, so now increase sprint speed where allies are near, and Landfall now fires 5 arc ground projectiles on cast. Well, next up we've got Middle Tree Voidwalker. Through a mix of player feedback, data, and running through some high-level PvE content, we felt that Nova Warp Super needed some attention. So buffing Nova Warp is a dangerous endeavour though, and we'll be monitoring to make sure we didn't overdo it. So in PvE, handheld Supernova was doing a pitiful amount of damage, so we've considered increasing its damage output, especially considering the time and proximity cost you're paying to charge it up, and you get within the range of an enemy. We've also included the hold time after charging to give you more time to throw it before it vanishes. So with Nova Warp, increased damage versus PvE combatants by 73%, that is a massive buff, and no longer shows movement speed while you're charging or charged, and now detonates on cast. with handheld Supernova, increased damage versus PV combatants by 100% and increased the hold time from 2.5 seconds to 3.2 seconds. Phew, well, we've omitted some minor changes and bug fixes from this list to avoid bogging down the TWAB any more than we already have. So for the full list of ability changes, be sure to check out the patch notes when Season 15 launches. So while this season changes are focused on balancing the power output on specific abilities, we're hard at work on a system level change that will enable us to create a healthier balance between abilities and gunplay, and we hope to share more about those changes in the future. Well, there are some other updates in This Week at Bungie, but they're kind of bug fixes and known issues, Artist of the Week, and all the other normal stuff that you get in This Week at Bungie. But I think the subclass and ability balancing is probably the most important thing, but let me know down in the comments what you think of the updates. There's loads there, and it certainly looks like a lot of changes, and I can't wait to get in there and try out some new builds with all these changes. But let me know down in the comments what you think. Massive update today, and really interested to see what you thought. Well, that is it for the latest Destiny 2 news in This Week at Bungie today on the 5th of August 2021. And as always, thank you so much for watching. For more Destiny 2 content like this, hit that subscribe button down below and subscribe to This Week in Video Games. If you want to join the community, check out the Discord link in the description, or you can follow me on Twitter at TWIFG Podcast. If you enjoyed this video, found it useful, liking and sharing the video would really help me out. Otherwise, check out the other videos on the channel. Thanks again. I'll see you soon.